And that was the moment when I was like, wow. And for the listeners who's listening, in order to fly back home, it's a 24 hours flight. You don't just take a quick train, a quick car ride in order to go back home. It's a 24 hours flight. Back home for me is Vietnam. 24 hours flight is a completely 12 hours, 13 hours different in time zone. And I was at a W-2. Love my job, but I did not have that flexibility. And that was a wake up call for me when I got that call. And my dad was sick, and I just realized that, wow, I actually could not just have that flexibility, have that call to be able to go back home and spend as much time as I wanted with my dad.
Who's this? Oh, you're an entrepreneur? Oh, you're a real estate investor. Oh, you're trying to learn from those who did it. Well, come into the lab then. Put your white coat on, gloves on, notepad, and let's build, y'all.
Experiment Nation, we're opening up this conversation with offense wins games and defense wins championships. And this guest who stepped into the lab, I was blown away of how concrete and easy she made it to understand the method to her madness in her own lab. With that said, rightfully so, she was an actual scientist, a retired scientist turned syndicator who's now also a mortgage broker, who's really scaled out her business from starting with one single family to a duplex and then doing smaller multifamilies to now doing a larger syndication. One of her largest ones was latest ones was 42 plus units, etc. And she was so calculated in her method of being able to leave her W-2 that she even scaled down her W-2 and went part-time before completely ripping off the band-aid, but at the same time being so strategic to have enough money to pay for things in cash. That's right, homes in cash, even getting ahead and buying her 6 unit or 5 unit in cash and then getting a loan later just so she could get in first as an investor and then getting a loan or refinancing later, right? Like literally within 3 weeks because she had the cash available. But the only reason she had the cash available because she was a steward of her money right from the get go, where she was very intentional. When I asked her about how much she spent when it came to numbers, she said numbers comes natural to her, and my initial rent was 25% of the income that I was making. The fact that she knew the percentage amount in itself told everything I needed to know of how strategic she was in her investments, which allowed her to be the syndicator, real estate investor, and business owner that she is today, where she's now even exploring on buying businesses, building, she has built her own brand, her own podcast, interviewing immigrants like myself who have actually stepped into a new arena, just like it was coming into a new country, and then making the best out of it from proofs of concepts to scaling to freedom into a lifestyle business that gives the opportunity to have that freedom. But we also didn't stay surface level because we really talked about and unpacked what does it really actually cost? What math should I be doing to step away from my W-2? There's a lot of noise out there of marketers who will sell you, but what is the actual milestones that I need to reach? There's one milestone she covered, there's two, and there's three, and you're going to want to listen to all these three milestones that you need to meet along the way to then give yourself the, again, green light and permission to then walk away once the math is mathin'. Not based on what someone is marketing, but based on true numbers that you can look at a balance sheet, numbers that you can look at your specific situation to then give yourself the out to step away in a manner that makes sense and that has risk baked into that decision. You do not want to miss this. After my 340 plus episodes, this was one of my favorites because we truly did unpack the reality and the real steps and concrete steps that it can take as you as an investor can also borrow from her blueprint as an investor who was once a scientist, retired scientist, that used that to explore and expand the experiments in her real estate journey and lab to get the results she has today. And the best part, she is just getting warmed up, y'all. So, with that said, without further ado, we welcome Giang Nguyen of One River Capital, from one immigrant to another. Let's unpack this episode, y'all. So, I'm very honored to have you step in to the lab as um, the founder of One River Capital, calling in from Philly and stepping into the lab. Yang Wayne, I want to officially welcome you, another immigrant, my sister from another mother, here in the lab. So let me ask you, because I want to this was such a seamless transition. You made it so easy for me. We talked about immigrants having their backs against the wall, having some sort of resilience. Um, I always say that you're a reflection of your company, and that's why I love these some of these small businesses. And when I say small but mighty businesses, because a small business
Mhm.
really is just right underneath 100 million. So these small and mighty businesses typically start with the person first, and it's a reflection of that. What was it for you? What made you go from going down the route that we're very familiar with as immigrants, right? STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. We've heard it
Yep.
before. That's in our DNA.
Yep.
Because, by the way, that does open up doors, but you
Absolutely.
saw another door that opened. How did this door open, and when in your trajectory, in your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Ruben, thank you so much for having me. And to
Absolutely.
your point, stepping into the lab, I was a scientist for almost 10 years.
Mm,
So I was doing translational research at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, doing gene therapy for blood disorder. And my path was as an immigrant, I went to a good college, got a good degree, got a good paying job. I wanted to go to medical school. And I got that call while I was working at the lab, literally, that my dad back home got sick. And
mm.
that was the moment when I was like, wow, and for the listeners who's listening, in order to fly back home, it's a 24 hours flight. You don't just take a quick train, a quick car ride in order to go back home. It's a 24 hours flight. It's
And back home for you is Vietnam, right?
back home for me is Vietnam. Yep.
Yep.
24 hours flight is a completely 12 hours, 13 hours different in time zone. And I was at a W-2. Loved my job, but I did not have that flexibility. And that was a wake-up call for me when I got that call.
Mm,
And my dad was sick, and I just realized that, wow, I actually could not just have that flexibility, have that call to be able to go back home and spend as much time as I wanted with my dad. He's okay now, thank goodness. But that was
oof.
the moment that I was like, wow, do I really want to go to medical school, spend the next 10 years in training? And I love the medical degree, love all that training, that experience. But my parent was getting older,
Mm,
and I didn't want to waste that next 10 years not be able to spend as much time as I wanted to with them. And so that was the push for me to grow really quickly in multifamily, replace my income with multifamily cash flow. And I left my W-2 as a scientist 3 years ago to now be a
mm,
full-time real estate investor and a mortgage broker. So to answer your question, that wake up call was that realization when I felt like I couldn't really decide, like have the choice of how I want to spend my time. And that I would need permission to spend time with my
mm.
family, which was not something that set right with me. And so that prompted me to switch to something that give me a bit more freedom,
Yeah.
to what to do with my time.
Yeah. Are you an only child?
I have an older sister. She's
You have
11
an
years
older sister.
older than I am. Mhm.
Is she here or is she back home?
She's here as well. Yeah, so my parents are here now. My sister is here.
Mm.
So yeah, we're now all now here in Philadelphia. My sister is also in real estate. She's a real estate agent, mainly does fix and flip, while I'm in the multifamily buy and hold.
Who caught the bug first? The real estate bug.
My sister got the bug first. Yep, she's is 11 years older. She's the one who uh, got me into buying my very first property,
Good for
which
her.
was a $30,000 foreclosure single
Mm.
family. So first property out of the gate, and we had no water, no electricity, no HVAC. It was vacant for 20 years, so we had a foundation problem. a two-story tall tree that was growing into the back wall. So first property out of the gate, and it was a full-on rehab. I was Googling a lot. I was figuring things out as I go. I did not know about anything real estate, but that was how I got started in the real estate investing world.
So often, appreciate you sharing that. One would say start with something that's, that you can chew. And it sounds like this was like a big bite to take as a first investment. Why go that route? Was there something, did you have some level of intel or information as to, the nastier they are, the bigger the upside? Like what was kind of like the thinking of going with that kind of a deal versus going with maybe a traditional turnkey or even maybe a cosmetic
Yeah,
rehab?
great question. I would say at that point, I knew nothing about real
Okay,
estate.
so you didn't
I
know what you didn't know almost.
didn't know what I didn't know. And one thing I always want to say is that I couldn't be scared of what I didn't know because I knew
Mm,
nothing to be scared of. So I didn't even know mortgages exist because back home, we bought a lot of things just with cash. So I
mm,
didn't know that I could borrow other people's money to grow my real estate. So at that point, I saved a lot of money from my W-2. I was living well below my mean and just saved the money to purchase that first property cash, fixing a lot of things in cash and sweat equity. A lot of Googling, a lot of that go went along, right? But because I didn't know what was needed, the only thing in that space at that point that made sense for me was that I was living 4 blocks from that place. So I knew the neighborhood. I knew that there was a park just around the block. I knew it was very
mm.
close to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, to the university. I knew that it was growing. And so I knew the neighborhood. It was also opposite from a school, a few blocks from a police station. So even though I didn't know how to run numbers, I didn't know how to estimate rehab, I didn't know anything foundation, I just knew kind of I want to say kind of just a common sense, right? Close to a park, opposite from a school, few blocks from police station, seem to be safe, seem to be growing, seem to be around employers. Those
Mm.
things make sense for me, even when I didn't know the numbers. And so that's
Mm.
how I went ahead with that purchase. And that was rehab fix for me to move into. So yeah, that was just I didn't know if I would make a profit. I just jumped in and went from there.
So where's your sister in all this?
So she helped me did do a lot of the rehab because she was very DIY. So she helped
Mhm.
me a lot with finding contractor, um,
Okay.
with be like, hey, maybe you can structure it this way. So that's what she was helping me with at that point. Um,
No renovation loan inside at that point.
No renovation loan inside at that point. A lot of sweat equity. At some point, I then went into a cash out refi as a primary home because I moved
Hmm.
in after we fixed it up. But at some point, it was just saving up and doing the work.
How
It
do you measure that investment as far as, and I'm sorry, you were gonna add something there, Yang.
No, I was just gonna say, because of that, and it was, fixing things after work on the holidays. So
Hmm.
it took me about a year and a half, almost two
Year and a
years
half.
to complete
Yep.
that construction. But yeah.
Retrospect, good or bad investment?
Good investment. I still have it in my portfolio. It is now a
Hmm.
rental. Same thing, right? It's always the location. So
Yeah.
it is in an upcoming area of Philadelphia. So it's still, appreciating. The cash flow is still there. And I move in. I was able to cash out refi, took all my cash out plus a little bit more equity, probably
Good.
sweat equity, obviously, that I put in.
Yeah.
So then that got me the capital to jumpstart the next few projects.
Okay, so at that point you mentioned something key that I want to
Hmm.
highlight, right? You said you lived below your means. You put in you saved a bunch of cash. Um, Can you enlighten me on what that means? Because people hear living below their means and they're like, oh, well, that's just everything expensive. There's inflation. There's such a like, what did you strategically do in your eyes in retrospect? And you're like,
Yeah.
I did this very well, and therefore I would tell a uh, younger version of myself to double down on this. And here are some areas where I could have done better that I didn't do. Like, if you're just to
Great
reflect on
question.
that.
Great question. I think at that point I was a heavy saver. So I remember this conversation with a family friends. He was
Mhm.
asking, "Hey, you're about to get your first paycheck. Like, what are you gonna do with the money? Like, what are you gonna buy?" And I was like, and I couldn't stop. Like, I was so
Who
excited.
asked you that?
A family friend.
Oh, no one's ever asked me that. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, because that was
Yeah.
my first paycheck after
Yeah.
college. So they was like, "What you gonna buy? What you gonna get to celebrate?" And I
Hmm.
was just so excited to be able to put money in my retirement account and get the employer's match.
Match.
I was like, I'm
Ecstatic.
maximizing on that match. I'm gonna put in the amount that will maximize that match before I get my paycheck afterward. So I would say that was the first thing that I thought I did really well, which is actually maximize that
Mhm.
free money from the employer. I was renting a studio a bit further away from the popular spot in town. So
Mm.
I rented a studio, and that was about maybe 20, I want to say 20, 25% of my take home even.
Mm. That's a
So
good reference point, by the way. I like how you went straight to the percentage and not a dollar
yeah,
amount. That
yeah.
tells
So
me how you're
that
thinking.
yeah, so that helps a lot on like I just be able to have a lot of extra cash after.
Mm.
So I lived there for I want to say 7 or 8 years until I moved into the primary home. So I lived there for a really long time. It was a bit further from the popular spot. And so it was cheaper. It was a small studio. And I lived there for a long time without just keep moving, even as my salary increased. So then the
Mm.
modest amount increased every year. I was a very good renter. I was pay rent on time. So they always have give me a very modest increase every year. So that really helped, right? Because if you think about your living expense, rent or mortgage are always the biggest one.
Yeah, that's what
And
kills
one,
most people,
yeah.
really. That,
Second
yeah.
one is transportation, probably, right? So I
Hmm,
didn't have a
interesting.
car. I still don't have a car.
Mm.
So I didn't
Why
have.
is that?
Personally, I hate driving. So I'll be
Hmm.
honest. Personally, I hate driving. Second, I was in Philadelphia, which was has a
Yeah.
very good transportation
Yeah,
system.
it's kind of like us when we're in New York. We've only had a car for the past 2 years. We didn't have a car before that.
Yeah, so I took subway, a bus to go to
Hmm.
work, and I picked somewhere I live that was very convenient to that transportation access. And even when I moved to my primary home, that was also very accessible with transportation. So I
Hmm.
didn't have a lot of transportation expense, right? And my employers actually match and has that pre-tax like transportation thing, so that also helped keep the cost down a lot. Third thing was food and grocery, right? I rarely ate out at that point, order in. I didn't order in, just cook a lot of food at home. So
Is this something that you've, because it sounds like you, I feel like I'm looking at my bookkeeping with you as my bookkeeper, and I know that these are the big rocks. Is this something that came to enlightenment after like living on your own for the first time, or is this something that like where are you getting all this insight from? You seem like you went 20 to 25%. Not everybody says that about the living expense. So where does this uh affinity to being close to your number come from?
that's such a great question. I think my background as a scientist, and at that point, I always
Mm.
like how the numbers work.
Mm.
Um, for me, I think the numbers always make sense. And you
Mm.
can tell stories, right? You can say these things, but the numbers is what
And
really tells you the stories, right? Whether it's doing
that's
well, whether it's
simple.
not doing well. So I find comfort in the numbers.
Numbers.
So in terms of rent, living expense, all that stuff. I I think that was just that's how I was just after college. I always have enjoyed experience more so than I've enjoyed material
Hmm.
things. And
Interesting.
I'm not saying that I don't spend money. Like I spend money. I just put more emphasis on experience. So for me,
Hmm.
when we grew up, it's always, taking a vacation as a family was a huge
Yeah.
thing. Um,
Rather than driving the latest fancy car.
yeah, yeah, we were never that as a family. So I've always
Mm.
enjoyed the trip as a family. So actually, right before I started college, we took a trip to Europe for a whole month, and
Mm.
that was like an amazing experience for me. So for me, I always been treasuring the experience, the time spent together, rather than a fancy apartment or a fancy car. So
Hmm.
that's how I grew up, and that's how I continue to function after college.
Love that.
But yeah, I've always loved the numbers, and I think that's get honed even more in my experience as a scientist.
Yeah.
To now even a mortgage brokers, everything has always been numbers, and I find comfort in that.
Yeah, it's interesting you find comfort in that because I would say a lot of individuals don't find comfort in that. And would you do you think what have you seen? Because as a mortgage broker, I can imagine people are like, oh yeah, like the number they tell you is never the number that it is, right? It's like, what's your credit score? Like, oh, I think it's that, or it's like, look, what are you seeing out there? And the reason I'm highlighting this, just so for context, when I ask questions and you have some context, is
Mhm.
I asked you originally, what were some good things that you did? And now maybe I want whoever's listening to kind of reflect on, hey, like, am I doing that? Like, what are you seeing out there as you're engaging with a lot of people, right? You're a multifamily syndicator, which we'll get to in a second, but you're also a loan, a broker. And so
Mhm.
you're speaking to a lot of individuals. Are you seeing that people have this level of awareness of their own numbers, or you're seeing that, people are a little bit just lost or maybe just not even aware, and I think that's for anybody, but don't let me tell you, you are more qualified to answer. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and that's such a great question. I don't think the majority of people out there are not quite familiar with the numbers. And that's not just loan, it's
Mm,
their investment cash flow, is their goal to retire in the next five
mm,
years. Numbers sometimes can feel scary. And I think the most common mistake I've seen from people when they say, like, oh, I'm just not a number person, is that they just get overwhelmed because there's so many numbers, right? So one thing I always work with my clients is just what are the most important numbers that you need to focus on. So
mm-hmm.
I'm sure you're familiar with KPI, key performance indicators, right?
Absolutely.
You can set a lot of KPIs, but one of the fun games that we can do is what is the really important KPI? What is that one or two numbers that if those one or two numbers are good, everything else has to be good.
Is this from an
So
investment perspective? Because I feel like I'm pop quiz here. Is this
this
what this
is,
is?
well, no, this is for anything. Even if you think about your budgeting, right? Like just
Mm,
anything. Think about your health. What do you track? All that stuff, right? You can track
mm.
a million numbers, but what are those one or two things that you can start tracking that you really want to pay attention to that will make a huge difference? So I think not a lot of people out there are very familiar with numbers, but I do think that a one good place to start is just start with one or two numbers
So
that
tell
you
us, what
want
are
to look
those one or
at.
two numbers? What are those two? I can't even wait.
Yeah, great question. So let's say, and I'm just giving example, right? Because I think every people's scenario is different.
Mm-hmm.
And so whenever you track KPIs, there is a lagging and a leading
Mm,
conversation, right? What are something that are the results? So for example, if you think about health, let me just give health as an example, right? You may want to track the result, which is less, for example, your weight, or maybe
mm-hmm.
it's how heavy you can lift, or
Yeah.
maybe it's how long you can run, right? So those are some of the result number that you can track. But leading up to that, how do you get the result might be the leading KPI, the actual actions that you can track. Are you running 3 times a week? Are you lifting weight 3 times a week? Are you eating 5 meals at home? Those are the action things that you can track that will lead to help you support your result. So the reason
Mm,
why I said that is because everyone's goals are different. So I know you're in the midterm rental insurance rental
yeah.
space, right? So what you track will be very different from what I track as a
Mm-hmm.
multifamily investor. So those key numbers are very different, but that's why I always want people to think about what is that end result that you want to track and what is that action numbers that you want to track. So I'll just give, for example, multifamily, right? In multifamily syndication specifically, the really numbers we can track revenue, we can track expense, we can track NOI, we can track a lot of that. But ultimately, as a multifamily syndicator, the really one thing that we want to track is how much really distribution we send our investors.
Mm.
Because
Like
that
lifetime?
really just overall, like quarterly, like what is that
Mm.
quarterly that we're sending to our investors? Because if that numbers is well, then we know everything upstream of that has to be well. So that is really the end result that we're tracking as a multifamily syndicator, right? From there, you can figure out like, hey, if we're not sending the distribution that we want to send, then we can work upstream and figure it out from there. But even if I track revenue, it won't really lead to that distribution that we want to our investors because that's not really that end result. So probably same thing for you. Like what is
Mm-hmm.
that end number that you want to track? And then you can figure out what are those some of those action numbers, right? So back to my result of multifamily. Let's say the end result that we track is distribution to our investors. The action things that we can track, right, would can become very granular, such as how many application did we receive for our
Mm-hmm.
vacancy this week? Where is our where are those coming from, right? So you can track a lot of granular thing up top, but it's very important to figure out what is that end result. That is very important that you want to track the most important thing numbers ever.
Experiment Nation, you've heard me talk about how multiple investors across the nation are landing these lucrative midterm rental insurance contracts by making these small tweaks on the branding and marketing side, especially if you're an existing short term rental operator. There is a quick and easy shift that you can make with the ride guide in place. And because we've launched a 2-day boot camp that not everyone could attend in real time, I've put together a recording where you can get all the materials and all the guides to focus on rebranding either your short-term rental business or your current midterm rental business so that you can actually have the insurance companies reach out to you. And then day 2 is if you want to actually play offense, how you can reach out to them by listing on the right platforms, etc. If you're looking to get this MTR bootcamp so that you can start optimizing and you can start receiving these lucrative contracts that again provide less headaches, less turnovers, unlike the Airbnb space, you can start receiving inquiries today by having the right guide in place. So please go to experimentrealestate.com/MTR bootcamp or click the link in the bio to make sure you get your hands on the midterm rental insurance bootcamp to fast track your way into landing these lucrative insurance contracts the exact same ways multiple investors have taken advantage of this unknown and untapped niche within the midterm rental umbrella. So
Um,
that's interesting because I would have guessed if you would have asked me in just having enough syndicators on that platform that perhaps your net operating income would be the big kind of what you're calling a leading indicator. You're
yeah,
saying it's actually one level, and I guess I would say one level down because
yeah,
it's more at the distribution
yeah,
level. Can you just help me
Mhm.
understand why? Is it because you want to have a high retention rate for your limited partners? Is it because you want to measure the, again, I know there's like IRR and all that
There are so many
fancy
things,
stuff.
right?
So
Yeah.
why the distribution though? You would think it'd be like if we increase the value of this overall, building, then therefore it's worth more. Therefore, we can go back to the bank and have more leverage and then distribute more to our partners. Help me debunk this theory as to why the distribution even is more important.
Yeah, great question. And I'm not gonna lie, NOI is super important, right? Because of course, any commercial NOIs will determine the value. But
Mm-hmm.
just like exactly what you said, Ruben, the NOI is actually a bit more upstream because you can have your NOI, but
Mm-hmm.
your investors may not see any dollars amount because now your NOI is gonna go to pay the debt. And let's say a lot of things that's been hitting syndicators, right, is that if your debt is in a variable rate, if your rate is now higher, your investors may not see a dollars of that NOI, right? From the NOI, if you need to put a lot of reserve, your investor may not see any of that NOI. So ultimately, as syndicators, and I think even if you didn't have investor, right, your cash flow is kind of that equivalence, the cash flow to your pocket, right? After you pay off debt, after you set out reserve, all that stuff is the actual true measurement of how well your investment is doing. Which is why I think if you track NOI, it is important to track NOI, but it really won't translate into your cash flow or how much money you are putting in your investor pocket because there's, like you said, a lot of layers in between.
Yeah.
Um,
And does that then mean, Yang, that um, for those of us who may or may not have looked at a general ledger recently, right, and we're not experts like you, are you then saying that net operating income uh comes before the debt service, so the debt service is not actually factored into the net operating income? You get NOI and then you subtract debt service, then you have cash flow. Is that how you the sequence?
yes, absolutely. You're entirely correct. The NOI is before you pay your debt.
Okay.
So when you compare the reason why the NOI is important in commercial real estate, right, is that you will get your NOI, you divide it by the cap rate, and you have your value. All of that is independent of how your property is financed. You can
Mm.
put down 50%, and now your debt payment is not going to be as much as if you were to put down 20%. So now, so your debt payment is different and it is after your NOI. And so your true cash flow doesn't come in until you have your NOI minus your debt. And it's
Mhm.
actually it would be minus what we call below the line items. So this may include your entity expense. This may include things that are not property related expense, but entity level expense before you get your true cash flow.
Mm.
So yeah, to your point, lots of layers in between, and ultimately the cash flow is what really come back to investors or your own pocket. So you really want to make sure you track that instead of the NOI itself.
Got it. So full circle moment here.
Yeah.
You were an operator in your own household where you kept your cost of living low. I love how you said
Mm,
the rent was anywhere from 20 to 25%. Then you talked about you were very big on leverage, so matching as early as you could. And
yes.
this is as before you even had your first investment, which allowed you to put a lot of money to the side and then start leveraging that capital to put to work.
Hmm.
You end up closing on a off market deal, putting all cash, all sweat equity. Um, and you tell me your sister's also in real estate. You were able to cash out, refinance, success there. You're still a scientist at this point. What's happening with this successful experiment, as we would call it, in the lab? You have a proof of concept now. Where does your mind go next?
Great question. At that point, right, to your point, Ruben, I had that proof of concept. I learned, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I learned about the cash flow quadrant. I learned about passive income, right, which was not taught in school.
Mm.
For me, as a biology major, I don't know if it's ever taught in school, even for others majors, but yeah, I didn't know that having passive income was possible. So after that is when I learned that, oh, if I had enough passive income, I could possibly reach financial freedom. That concept of financial freedom was what I learned out of that experience.
Mm.
And at that point, that was when I looked into it, and that was like, oh, if I were to do single family, and at that point, this was a while ago. We didn't really have short-term rental, we didn't have midterm rental
Mhm.
insurance, we didn't have all of that. So
Mm.
when I was comparing the cash flow of a single family versus multifamily, I was like, darn, it's gonna take me a lot of this things to get to my numbers. Like, I
A
don't.
lot of matching, a
That's a
lot more
lot.
matching.
A lot more matching, a lot more doors, a lot more sweat equity. And I was like, I
Yeah.
don't think I could do that. And so with my goal being like, hey, financial freedom, getting more of my time back, that was why I decided on multifamily. For the cash flow strictly. I was not looking, my whole focus was not appreciation. It was not even the tax benefit. It was just something that would give me the cash flow to replace my income, to
Hmm.
leave my W-2. So from there, the next experiment was duplex. So I started small with the next
Hmm.
experiment of multifamily. I actually bought a single family and did a zoning play to convert that into a duplex. That was cash flowing well, and I went
So
on.
you couldn't have made it easy for yourself and just bought a duplex. You had to go through that
I
zoning
had to go
process.
through the
You're like,
zoning
let me make
process.
this as hard as possible on the front end, pay my dues so that later things can get easier. I mean,
Here's the thing
golly.
though, I did do it the ish harder way, but the zoning play was that I bought something that was zoned as a single family,
Hmm.
but also allow for zoning as a multifamily by right. So
Hmm.
I didn't want to deal with the uncertainty of getting a variance, of going through the zoning board. There
Sure.
was just certain, and a lot of city as well for the listeners, there's a lot of zoning in the cities that will allow for density by right.
What does that mean by right?
What that means is you just need to apply for a change in usage, but the zoning itself allows for it. So you don't have to ask for the neighborhood permission. You don't have
Mm.
to ask for the
It's like
city
flipping on a switch
permission.
almost. It's like, hey, can
Yeah,
you
just
turn
flipping on a
this
switch.
on into
Exactly.
interesting.
And this
How
is
do you
when the numbers coming into play again, because
mm,
that zoning as cities planning is very specific. So Philadelphia, for example, right, you are allowed a certain unit based on the um, land area, and you then also need to cut, from the front, from the back, but you're allowed a certain density by
mm,
right. Just like you say, flip on the switch, apply for that, and you get approved immediately. You don't have to wait. You don't have to ask for permission
it's
from anyone.
lovely.
And that's really remove the risk, right? Because can you
Yeah.
imagine if you were to run the numbers based on it being multifamily and then you have to wait on someone else to approve?
Yeah.
So yeah, and that actually allowed me to buy single family at a higher price than what a single family investor would want to purchase.
Can
Because
you say that one more time?
yeah, so I was able to bid on the single family at a higher price and still make a profit because I know that the
On the back end.
highest use is not a single family, highest best
Oh,
is a
wow, wow,
multifamily.
wow. That is so interesting. So meanwhile, others are looking at this deal as, oh, this I'm capped out. This makes no sense as a single family, but you've
Yep.
already done your due diligence. You understand uh on the back end that okay, this is like this it makes sense for me to overpay on the single family front because I'm
Hmm.
running multifamily numbers because of my end goal. Wow.
Yeah,
Interesting.
absolutely. Yeah, so if you are in a market, especially in a lot of cities that has zoning,
Mm,
check out your zoning and what they allow for because yeah, there's a lot of single family that may allow for multis that now you can actually even do like a condo play. You can even then
mm,
sell individual condos. I know ADU is the popular thing
Right.
now, but that's also a very similar concept, right? What is
Mhm.
allowed and how can I push it up to highest and best use? So that was my next experiment. I bought a single family, converted into a duplex.
Sure.
It was cash flowing well. Where I got stuck though, and this is very common also for the listeners who want to invest in a 2 to 4 unit space, the comparables was very hard in the 2 to 4 unit space because not a lot of people will fix up a nice 2 to 4 units and go ahead and sell it
Mm.
in compared to like a single family space. You have a lot of flips in single family, but not so many of them in the 2 to 4 units. So I was not able to do a perfect burr on my 2 to 4 units. So I consistently has a little bit of cash stuck back in, even though I was
Mm.
cash rolling really, really well, but I could only save so much, right? So at that point,
Mm.
I was like, this is not going to work to stay in a 2 to 4 unit space. So that's how I move on to the next experiment into the commercial multifamily side, the 5 units and above space. And
And may I ask,
yeah,
before you go, Yang, how did you you bought a single family, you had
mhm,
the zoning by, I think you're calling it by right,
by right.
is that
Yeah.
right? Which
Hmm.
then meant you were going to turn the single family home into a duplex.
Hmm.
Did you then build the other side, or did
Did
you
I what?
build the other side, add the other side? Did you do construction
Oh, yeah, great
on the other
question.
side? Yeah.
So in Philly, we have a lot of row homes. So
Mm.
this is actually, again, very specific. I bought a single family where the basement has a walk out. So it's one of those
Okay.
things when it technically still considered basement, but in the back is actually walk out into a street.
You and me both, by the way, just so you know, our criteria, if you can go and for listeners, right, go to investedescapes.com, you will see all of our properties on our website have a walkout, which means that every property, as a matter of fact, sometimes we have a middle door with separate access to kitchens, which means
Mm-hmm.
that you technically have a duplex within single family lender buying terms, which then
Mm-hmm.
allows you to down the road be flexible
Love it.
to rent it as is. So you and I on the same
Love
wavelength.
those.
I
Yeah.
love those. It's almost like a split level slash walkout basement
Yes.
slash. Yeah.
Yes. So then I
It's a
took
hack, by the way. That's a hack.
Yeah, so I took that and I convert first floor and second, essentially basement and first floor into one unit, and then second floor is their own
Good for you.
separate
Good for you.
unit.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that and I was going to house hack one of them where I was gonna
Mhm.
live on the first floor, rent out the basement because it has its own thing, kitchenette,
Yeah.
everything, and then also rent out the second floor.
Did
Um,
you pay in cash for for the changes again, or did you learn from the first deal and say, "Hey, maybe
Great
there's other
question.
levers I can pull"?
Great question. I actually did not learn on the lending side.
Mhm.
And it's a couple of things, a couple of reasons why. Um, at that point, and I think it's also kind of what prompted me to become a mortgage broker now, I was on a work visa. And
Mm.
so you hear a lot of advice of people like, hey, go to credit unions. They have the best lending term, all that jazz. They
Mhm.
do not lend to anyone who does not have either a permanent residence or US citizens. So
Really?
at some
I
point, yeah.
I thought I got by with my TN visa, North American Free Trade Act, maybe because it's Canadian.
Yes, Canadian is different. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's very
Look at that. We need to
interesting.
get this immigrant podcast thing going. We need to
Yeah,
unpack
for
this.
sure. I know.
Yeah.
I think I
Because I
never.
know the struggle, girl.
Oh my God. And yeah, no, I'm a spreadsheet person. And so at that point I had a spreadsheet of like I think
Mm,
30 to 40 lenders. I was emailing, I was calling as
wow.
I was trying to get funding overall. Now, you can definitely get bridge funding as someone who does not have permanent residence or US citizenship. Each lender is different, right? But
And do we know why? Do they see it as a risk? Like you might just take back off to Vietnam and not pay your due. Like what's the thought process? Enlighten us since you're in this space. Is
yeah.
it just a riskier profile or what is it exactly?
Yeah, great question. So, a couple of things, and it really depends on the lenders themselves. Some lenders, they do see it as a risk because you never know when immigration, as we know right now, whenever immigration laws would change.
Mm,
So for a lot of lenders, they would lend if you have a certain numbers of time left on your visa. But to your point, right, you never know when immigration would change and how,
yeah,
whether that would change a person's status in the country and whether that would change how they can own and operate
wow.
property. So that would be the first thing. I do think the second thing is it depends on what the lenders do, but some lenders do not keep their lending, their
They'll
loan
sell it,
on the
right?
book. They will sell it.
Mm,
And so when they sell it, there's just certain regulation that comes with it that also restrict exactly what the fine need to look like. So that will also determine what the lenders can
yeah.
lend. The third thing I'll say for the credit unions is I think it's just they have different committee that have different rules. And so
Experimentation, I believe there are two critical components that will help you achieve your goals very quickly and succeed. Number one, it's information like this that you received on a show, in an episode, and content that you can find on my YouTube channel or anybody's channel. And then there's a community. And the way we've been able to expedite our process, the way people in our community, people that we consult, mastermind members, whoever, they get the information on an episode like this, but then they also have a support, whether it's me guiding them or being guided through a community. There is an opportunity for you listening to be able to expedite your process or even expedite your results that you're seeking by being part of the community. If that is what you're interested in, we at Experiment Nation happen to have a community devoted to helping maximize your occupancy and your profitability altogether, regardless of which market that you are in. And for that reason, you have an opportunity where you can go to experimentrealestate.com/submit if you're looking to work in an environment that can help you prosper faster. Call out any areas that you might not be familiar in, especially the blind spots. That's where a guide comes in hand, and I would be a pleasure and honor to be your guide. But in order to make sure you're a good fit, make sure you go to experimentrealestate.com/submit so that my team can go ahead and take it and see if you're a good fit to join the mastermind and the multiple programs that we have. In addition to that, I'm also now a YouTube partner, which means that I want to give you more access to information, more access to Q&As, more access to the questions that actually come out of our mastermind that help people expedite the process. We've seen people get anywhere from $4,000 to $5,000 to $6,000 to even $7,000 a month net on just one door by applying the strategies that we use by working with corporations and furnished accommodation in a very strategic way. So if you're interested, make sure you also subscribe, because I'm going to have different tiers that's on YouTube now that we've become YouTube partner to continue to be the bridge to your success in your lab. And your lab means your life, your goals, or wherever you're trying to head. So make sure you also hit the subscribe button on my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/real estate experiment. We'll be there. You can also look us up at Midterm Rental Insurance Experiment. We will be there. Make sure you hit the subscribe, because that's when you'll know the tiers that are available to you that make sense for you, your marketplace, for your results. Remember, you're only one experiment away. Let's build.